Setting, parched valley, Wyoming territory. The harsh winter of 1877. Frost covered the streets of Parched Valley in hushed stillness. The heavens, dark and oppressive, hung low above the structures as if attempting to flatten the settlement beneath their weight. Cold air swept between the narrow passages, bringing grit, frozen particles, and the far-off cry of what could have been a coyote. Jackson Stone arrived by himself. At 34, he sat tall on his mount, a figure shaped by wilderness and solitude. For 5 harsh seasons, he'd survived alone in the remote highlands within a shelter constructed by his own labor. He descended to civilization only when provisions dwindled, or when the nighttime quietude pressed too heavily against his spirit. This day demanded salt, bullets, and liquor. He climbed down near the trading post, yet the rich aroma of baking loaves drew his notice, directing him toward the bread shop several doors away. Heat from the active ovens drifted outward, offering rare warmth amid such freezing temperatures. Jackson approached the entrance, but movement in the powder caught his attention. Crouched near the waste container outside the bakery knelt a young woman, her hands exposed to the elements. Her gown, once finely crafted judging by the delicate fabric remnants, had deteriorated to mere tatters. Her flesh showed red patches from the brutal cold. With trembling fingers, she retrieved half a thrown-away biscuit, its surface marked with debris. She consumed it as though it were a divine blessing. From within the shop, an angry voice erupted. "Move away from there!" shouted the proprietor's spouse. "Continue on, child. Scavenging in the mud like some animal? Disgusting runaway." The door flew wide. The woman retreated from the container, breadcrumbs dropping from her mouth. "I commanded you to leave." The baker's wife lifted her broom, swinging it through the air. "You possess audacity returning to this place." Jackson moved forward, shielding her from the harsh wind. His gaze fell upon the young woman's features. Large eyes, hollow cheeks, split lips. He pivoted toward the shop entrance and entered. "1 fresh loaf, please," he stated, his voice quiet. The proprietor's wife grumbled but provided the warm bread. Jackson paid, turned, and walked directly back into the bitter cold. He crouched before the woman and extended the loaf. She gazed at him, blinking frozen droplets from her eyelashes. No woman should be forced to plead for nourishment, he declared. She remained motionless briefly. Then slowly, as if questioning whether this was reality or fantasy, reached for the bread. "I am grateful," she murmured. "I did not intend ... He shook his head. "Consume it," she bit into the loaf. A noise escaped her throat, something between gratitude and amazement. Her hands shook. She ate as though fearful someone might steal it away. The baker's wife scoffed. "She's the one who fled from the Hartwell ceremony," she announced loudly enough for nearby folks to hear. "Stole her intended's valuables, they claim. Abandoned wealth for what?" Wandering through snow like a confused creature, the woman froze mid-bite. Jackson looked at her again. "Is this accurate?" he asked. She lowered the bread. "My name is Isabella Clare," she said quietly. "I was meant to wed Marcus Hartwell, but I escaped. That is everything." Jackson studied her expression, haunted yet dignified. "Is that your concern or mine?" he inquired. She blinked. "I suppose neither," he nodded once, content. Behind them, the wind intensified, merciless and cutting. She clutched the loaf close, her teeth chattering now that her hands were free. "Do you have somewhere warm tonight?" he asked it. She shook her head. "Only behind the tavern. They permit me to rest near the horse shelter if I remain silent." Jackson reached into his jacket. He withdrew his neckcloth and wrapped it around her shoulders. She gasped. "I'll return before darkness falls," he said simply. "Don't wander far." Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the white mist. Isabella stood still in the snow, a partially consumed loaf in her grasp, and a scarf that carried faint scents of fire and evergreen around her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, her breathing didn't cause such pain, and someone had regarded her not with revulsion or condemnation, but as if she still possessed value. Isabella finished the loaf gradually, each piece chewed with careful attention, as if it were sacred, as if it might be the final thing she'd ever taste. The crust was hard, the interior somewhat stale. But to her, it was precious gold, sustenance, compassion. Jackson had disappeared into the swirl of snow and twilight, his form consumed by the silence of Parched Valley's main thoroughfare, but the scarf he'd left behind remained clutched around her shoulders. Its wool coarse, its fragrance faintly like smoke and leather, and something dependable. She drew it closer, as if it might keep the remainder of the world at bay. She was behind the saloon now, tucked in the cramped space between the grain storage and the damaged fence, back against cold timber, knees pulled tight, her hands buried beneath her legs for whatever little warmth she could discover. Her breath hung in the air, pale and brief. No one addressed her directly as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, but they spoke abundantly around her, heard about her situation. "She's the escapee from Cedar Falls," someone mumbled outside the general store, their tone half inquisitive, half contemptuous. "I heard she took the Morrison family's sapphire pendant," a woman added. "Worth more than this entire dusty settlement," some pampered estate daughter, another spat. "Believes if she acts destitute, we'll offer her pity. They've posted a reward for her," a man said bluntly. Real currency, alive or dead, I'd guess. Isabella had endured worse. She'd been trained to survive on silence, to withdraw inward until she became invisible. Even when standing directly in the center of everything, she knew how to vanish. Yet the whispers still cut, not because they were false, but because they were nearly accurate. The narrow passage beside the saloon reeked of dampness, straw, bitter alcohol, and cold despair. The stable hand had allowed her to stay, though not with words. He had simply looked away when she curled up behind the feed containers, and that was kindness enough. No one else approached. The wind arrived forcefully that night, sharper than a blade. Her coat, already thin, had soaked through at the seams. Her boots squelched with every movement. She'd long ceased feeling her toes or her fingers or her heart until she heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Isabella tensed, her breath catching, her fingers reaching beneath the straw for a sharp piece of broken wood she'd concealed earlier just in case. But the figure stepping through the shadows made her freeze. "Jackson," he said nothing initially. His hat was pulled low, his shoulders dusted with snow. In his gloved hands he carried a wool covering, thick, weathered, folded with care and something else. A blade, simple, iron-handled, gleaming under the slice of moonlight. He knelt beside her and without a word draped a blanket across her lap. Then he set the knife gently by her boot. No flourish, no grand gesture, just quiet protection. Jackson looked up, finally meeting her eyes. Isabella blinked. Her throat felt too constricted. He beat the snow off his gloves, straightened and said, "I thought you might rest better, knowing you had means to defend yourself." She looked from the blade to him, her voice cracking. "Why? You're not cattle," he replied simply. "You don't deserve to freeze like one." And just like that, something broke inside her. It wasn't loud, just a breath released with a sound that bordered on a sob. Her shoulders trembled. Her face crumpled. Tears came. Hot, unstoppable, not from terror or hunger or cold, but because someone finally had looked at her and seen more than what the world had labeled her. He had seen her worth. Jackson didn't linger. He gave one final nod and turned back into the snowfall, vanishing once more. Isabella stared after him, clutching the blanket to her chest, rocking slowly as tears slid down her cheeks. For the first time in ages, she wasn't a fugitive. She was something else. She was human. Morning arrived, pale and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Parched Valley stirred slowly, smoke rising from chimneys, boots crushing frost. Wagons creaking past, shuttered storefronts. Jackson, Stone, stood outside the grain storage with 2 horses saddled and waiting. Isabella blinked up at him from behind the stable door, still wrapped in the wool blanket he had left her the previous night. "Are you prepared to leave this place?" he asked, not harshly. She hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "Where would I travel?" He gave a small shrug. "My homestead is peaceful. Ample space. No one there except me, a few chickens, and the wilderness. Aren't you concerned what folks will say?" she asked. "I ceased caring about people's gossip years ago." She searched his face for a long moment. Then without another word, stepped forward. They rode out of Parched Valley just after sunrise, frost still clinging to the tall grass. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air. For miles they said nothing. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was like a blanket itself, woven with mutual understanding. It was Isabella who finally broke it. "I was not always fleeing," she said quietly. Jackson didn't turn his head. Just kept riding beside her, listening. "My family, the Clares, we were once prominent. We owned property in Virginia. Had a residence with pillars and ivory curtains and a piano in the sitting room. What occurred? The conflict." He said it like a graveyard name. "My father returned bitter and shattered. The property was destroyed, the money vanished, but pride, that survived. So he did what broken Southern gentlemen do," she swallowed. "He traded me to Marcus Hartwell, a railway heir. Northern wealth, Southern brutality. It was supposed to rescue us." Jackson's jaw shifted slightly, but he remained silent. "I knew something was wrong the moment I met him. The way he regarded me like livestock and worse, the way he treated the servants." Her voice dropped. "I discovered one of the housemaids weeping in the pantry. He had cornered her, left marks. What did you do?" "I informed my father. He said, 'We should be thankful the Hartwells even considered us. That girls like her should understand their position. And you?' I told Marcus I would not marry a man who hurt women." Jackson finally turned his eyes toward her. He laughed. Isabella said, voice tight. "Said, if I refused him, he would tell everyone I stole from him. Said the brooch my mother left me, the one I planned to wear at the ceremony, he would call it stolen. Said the shawl I packed was part of the dowry, that the locket I wore since I was 12 was his gift and I had no right to it. Or he'd have me arrested." "So you ran?" Jackson said softly. She nodded. "I took only what was mine and now there's a bounty on my head." They reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The wind lifted Isabella's hair as she turned toward him. "You can turn back," she said, suddenly aware of what she was dragging him into. "I will not blame you." Jackson dismounted without a word. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. He handed it to her, then looked out over the hills, quiet for a long moment. Then he said it. "If that's a crime," his voice calm but firm, "then every woman with a backbone should be behind bars." Isabella stared at him, her eyes wide. A sound left her lips, part disbelief, part laughter, part something close to relief. He glanced at her then, and something like a smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. "We're not going back," he added. "Not unless you want to." She shook her head, her throat tight. "I want to go forward," he nodded. "Then forward it is." They rode on into the morning mist, toward the high country, toward a place where pasts were not erased, but where maybe, just maybe, they could be outrun. The first snow fell gently, like a lullaby over the mountains. Isabella stood at the edge of the porch, a woven basket in her hands, watching flakes melt on her sleeves. The world had gone still, white, quiet, and wide. Life at Jackson's homestead unfolded without ceremony. He rose before the sun, fed the animals, chopped wood, mended what needed mending. Isabella did not ask to help, but he handed her small tasks like it was the most natural thing in the world. She washed clothes by the creek, learned to build a fire that would not choke the cabin with smoke, and slowly began to understand the rhythm of a life shaped by necessity. They said little. The silence between them was not cold. It was the respectful kind. Isabella kept her distance, and Jackson gave it willingly. One morning, as she struggled to balance a heavy bucket of water, he appeared beside her and took the handle wordlessly. That afternoon, he showed her how to make cornbread using molasses and flour. She burned the first batch. He didn't laugh, just poured her a glass of milk and told her to try again. By the second week, he offered to teach her to ride properly. "You'll need it," he said. "Can't live out here on foot forever." She was stiff in the saddle and her hands fumbled the reins, but she learned. The next day, he placed a rifle in her arms. "Just in case," he said, tone even. Isabella had never touched a gun before. Her hands trembled, but he stood behind her, quiet, steady, guiding her grip, correcting her aim. "You're not trying to kill," he said. "You're trying to survive?" There were no pet names, no flirtations. He called her Miss Claire or nothing at all. She called him Mr. Stone, but at night she sometimes caught him glancing at her across the fire, and something soft flickered in the space between them. Then came the fever. It started as a chill in her spine. By nightfall she was shivering uncontrollably, her skin damp with sweat, breath shallow. Jackson found her curled in bed, cheeks flushed with heat. He didn't hesitate. He placed a cold rag on her forehead, stoked the fire higher, and sat beside her with a basin of water and a cloth. Through the night he did not leave. He changed the cloth on her head, coaxed her to sip water, whispered to her even when she could not answer. When her breathing grew rapid, he picked up a worn book of verses from the shelf and began to read aloud. His voice was rough, the words simple, but they came with care. And though the night be cold and long, I'll wait until you find your song. He read until the oil lamp burned low. Then he set the book down and simply sat there, watching her face. By dawn, the fever broke. Isabella's eyes opened slowly. Light spilled in through the cracked shutter, painting gold across the wooden floor. She saw him first, not the room, not the fire, not the window. Jackson, asleep in the chair beside her, head tilted slightly, one hand still holding hers. Their fingers were laced together, not out of duty, not from routine, but because he had reached for her and had not let go. Her lips parted. She said nothing, but something warm pressed behind her ribs. Not just relief, something else. He had been afraid to lose her. Snow had piled thick on the rooftops by the time trouble came knocking. It was late afternoon. The fire burned low in the hearth, and Isabella was peeling potatoes when the sound of hooves broke the stillness outside. Jackson rose from his chair, motioned for her to stay back, and stepped onto the porch. A man sat astride a black gelding, long coat dusted with frost, a rifle slung across his back. He had the look of someone who had ridden far and fast, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "You Jackson Stone?" the man asked, voice flat. Jackson nodded. "Who's asking?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Thomas Cole, bounty hunter." "I'm here on lawful business." Jackson took the paper, unfolded it. Isabella watched from the shadows just inside the door, her heart hammering in her chest. The words were clear. Wanted, Isabella Clare. Theft of dowry goods. Absconding from legal engagement. Reward $2,000. Authorized by Marcus Hartwell, Virginia. Jackson folded the paper slowly. "She's not here." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "She was," Jackson said. "Came through weeks ago, sick and half dead. I gave her food and fire. She left 2 mornings back. You let a wanted fugitive walk? I let a girl walk. If she was anything else, I didn't see it." The bounty hunter looked past him toward the cabin. "Mind if I check?" Jackson didn't move. "I do." Tension crackled in the cold air like a tight wire ready to snap. But after a long moment, Cole just clicked his tongue and tugged his reins. "If she comes back and you're found harboring her, you'll answer for it. You understand?" Jackson gave a single nod. "I understand more than you think." The rider turned. Snow scattered under his horse's hooves as he disappeared down the ridge. Jackson watched until the man was a shadow in the trees. Then he turned and walked back inside. Isabella was gone. He found her tracks in the snow, small prints leading away from the house toward the narrow path into the canyons. He saddled his horse and followed, riding until the sky turned orange with dusk. She was huddled beneath a rock overhang, her coat wrapped tight around her, face pale from cold and fear. "You should not have." "Come," she said as he dismounted. "I should not have." "Let you go," he answered. "I couldn't let him drag you into this." "I'm already in it?" She looked up at him then, eyes rimmed with red. "I'm not worth the trouble, Jackson." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt in front of her, took her hands in his cold and shaking. Then he said quietly but firmly, "I don't need your innocence, Isabella. I just want your presence." The words hung in the canyon like a vow. Not loud, not showy, just truth. Isabella blinked. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't look away. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Jackson squeezed her hand. "I have lived with silence for so long, and now with you, it's still quiet. But it feels alive." She pressed her forehead against his chest. He held her there against the cold, against the fear, against the lie of her unworthiness. They returned to the cabin under cover of night. No papers, no promises, just a man who had chosen and a woman no longer running. Word traveled fast in Parched Valley as it always did. By the following week, whispers curled around every porch and shop front. Children were hushed when Isabella passed. Some women crossed the street. A few men spat tobacco with more venom than usual. They said she was a thief, a liar, a runaway bride with a price on her head. But there were others quiet ones who remembered Mrs. Delaney. The widow, who ran the apothecary, stood in the post office one morning, hands trembling as she spoke to the sheriff. My daughter Clara was near death once. Fever took her lungs, couldn't breathe. The doctor had gone to the next town, and it was Isabella, yes, that same girl who stayed up all night with her, mixed the herbs, read from the Psalms. Clara lived. Ask anyone. The sheriff rubbed his chin, uncertain. That was years ago. Some kindness don't expire, Mrs. Delaney said. And neither should our memory, at the chapel. Reverend Calhoun sat down by lantern light and wrote a letter, his weathered fingers moving carefully across the parchment. He had been a Union chaplain once, then a wanderer, now a shepherd to a small flock. To whom it may concern, he wrote, I have known Miss Isabella Clare in spirit and deed. I do not know the full truth of her past, but I know the content of her present character. She is not a danger to society. She is its quiet redemption. He signed the letter with a flourish and posted it to the circuit judge in Cheyenne. Back at the homestead, Isabella moved carefully through her days. She cooked, mended, fed the animals, but she avoided the windows, avoided town. The weight of accusation bent her shoulders lower each week. You can go, she said to Jackson one night. If it gets too much, he set his coffee cup down slowly. It's not too much, but the way they look at you now, as if you're compromised. He leaned forward. You think I live for their glances? Isabella said nothing. They weren't there, Jackson continued. They didn't see you crawl through snow with bleeding feet. They didn't see you stitch my coat or sit by that colt when it was sick. You've stood beside life and death and chose to stay. Her eyes filled. But she blinked the tears away. That Saturday, the townspeople gathered in the market square. It was market day, but the air carried more tension than usual. Someone had circulated the bounty poster. Copies hung on the general store's window, the saloon's wall, even the church's notice board. The sheriff was there. So was the mayor, the reverend, farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, and Jackson. He rode into town slow and steady, dismounted, and walked straight into the center of the square. A hush fell. She's not hiding, he said. I am not hiding her. He unfolded a single sheet of paper, the bounty notice, and held it in the air. This is what you've all seen, but it's not what I've seen. He turned slowly, meeting their eyes one by one. You want to know who Isabella is? She's a woman who's fought harder for survival than most men I know. She ran from a marriage that would have killed her spirit or worse. She didn't run from shame. She ran to survive. A murmur swept the crowd. He let the words settle. I don't know about you, but I've lived in this territory long enough to tell a coward from the brave. Isabella is brave. She is honest. She is my choice. Someone near the front, Mrs. Delaney, stepped forward. He's right, she said. That girl saved my child? Then another voice. The Reverend. I've sent a letter to the court. If this community stands for second chances, let it stand now. A third voice, then a fourth. Soon a dozen. Jackson didn't smile. Didn't gloat. He just looked up at the sheriff. Well? Sheriff Dobson took off his hat. I reckon this town's made its decision. I'll send word to Cheyenne. Tell them we're not harboring a criminal. We're protecting one of our own. Jackson nodded once, then turned and walked back toward his horse. From the edge of the square, Isabella watched from behind the blacksmith's shop, hidden, but not for long. She pressed her hand to her chest, breath shallow. She was not a ghost anymore. She was a name, a person, a woman claimed not with chains, but with courage. The sun was warm that morning, casting golden light over the rolling fields behind the cabin. Spring had come early to Parched Valley. Snow melted, wildflowers pushed through the thawed soil, and everything felt touched by renewal under the wide Wyoming sky. A few chairs had been set out in a crescent on the soft grass. A makeshift altar of stacked stones stood near a blooming hawthorn tree. There were no decorations save for nature, no music save for the breeze and birdsong, and no crowd, just the people who mattered. Mrs. Delaney sat in the front row, holding her daughter's hand. Reverend Calhoun stood at the center, Bible tucked beneath his arm. The blacksmith, the stable boy, and the widow from the edge of town who had once given Isabella an apple all came with simple smiles and kind eyes. Isabella stepped out from behind the cabin, the wind catching the hem of her old white dress. It had belonged to her mother, once plain cotton, aged with time, but the lace collar still held. Her dark hair was braided low, and nestled behind her ear was a single wild daisy. Jackson had picked it himself that morning. He stood waiting at the altar, hands steady, boots dusted, wearing his cleanest shirt, though the elbow was still patched. He didn't need to be polished. He needed to be real. And he was as Isabella walked toward him, her eyes locked on his. The world seemed to pause. The years of fear, of fleeing, of hiding fell away with every step. Reverend Calhoun opened his Bible, but even he seemed caught in the hush that surrounded them. "We gather today," he began, "not to erase the past, but to mark the start of something chosen, something true." He looked at them both. "Do you speak your vows from freedom?" Jackson nodded. "I do." Isabella glanced down, her voice soft. "I do." The Reverend stepped back slightly. "Then speak your hearts." Jackson reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small slip of paper, but didn't read from it. He folded it again and met her gaze. "I have no land to give you that you do not already walk upon. No gold, no fancy name, but I give you every day that remains in me. I give you my silence and my storms, my hands, my hearth, and what heart I have left." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. She whispered her own vow, barely loud enough for the breeze to carry. "I once thought survival was all I could hope for. But you gave me stillness and space and something I never dared ask for: dignity. I promise to keep your fire lit and your name safe, and to love you in the quiet ways that last." A long pause. Then Isabella looked up, voice trembling but certain. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Jackson didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, took her hand, and said simply, "I've never been more sure of anything." Reverend Calhoun raised his voice just enough. "Then by the grace of God and the will of those who stand here, I pronounce you man and wife." No applause followed, only silence, and in it something deeper. Jackson leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers. Not a kiss for show, but a touch that said, "We made it," and that was enough. Years had passed since that cold winter in Parched Valley. The small wooden cabin still stood a little grayer now, with a porch that creaked when the wind blew and shutters that held firm through every storm. Wildflowers blanketed the field around it, lupin, primrose, Indian paintbrush swaying gently beneath the sun. The fence had been freshly painted. The gate still swung open with the same soft squeak, but what filled the air now more than anything else was laughter. Children's laughter. Isabella sat beneath the apricot tree where blossoms fluttered like snow in the warm spring breeze. Her fingers moved gently, looping soft cream yarn into the beginnings of a tiny sweater. Beside her sat a wooden cradle carved by hand, its sides adorned with daisies and hearts. Jackson had spent a week working on it, shaving and sanding, humming to himself in the barn while the baby inside her grew. Footsteps crunched softly over the earth. Jackson appeared, dust on his shirt and a faint scratch across one cheek. On his shoulder, their 3-year-old son lay curled, fast asleep, arms hanging limp. Isabella smiled. "Fell asleep on the horse again?" she teased. Jackson chuckled quietly. "He is his father's son." He eased the boy down into the grass beside her, letting him nestle against her skirts. Isabella's hand went to her belly, round and firm beneath her cotton dress. A second life stirred within. She looked up at Jackson, eyes warm. "I used to think," she murmured, "that home wasn't meant for me. That I'd always be running or hiding or barely surviving." Her voice caught, and she looked out across the field where a neighbor's girl chased after a clutch of baby chicks, giggling and barefoot. But now, she whispered, I don't just have a home. I have a life. Jackson knelt beside her, pressing one calloused palm gently over her stomach. You gave this place meaning, he said. You made it somewhere a man could stop wandering and stay. Their foreheads touched. No promises spoken. None needed. Every sunrise, every shared meal, every midnight whisper had been their vow. From the porch, the smell of baking bread floated through the air, a pie cooling on the windowsill. The same recipe Isabella had learned in the dark days when hope was still a foreign taste. She looked to the sky, bathed in gold, then spoke in a voice soft as cotton. I don't need my name in any history book, she said. Just let it be whispered when a child laughs, when a man lays down his burdens, and when someone calls a house home. A small wooden sign hung above the cabin door, worn smooth by years of wind and rain. Its letters, carved by hand, still read, where bread was offered, a family was born. If this tale stirred something deep within you, if it made you believe once more in second chances, in gentle love, in the kind of home that is built not from timber but from trust, then don't forget to hit that like button. Share your thoughts about your favorite moment in the comments below. And subscribe for more tales where hearts beat stronger than gunshots and love blossoms where nobody expected it could. Out here beneath the endless sky, every story leaves its mark. And we're just beginning. Until our paths cross again, friend, travel with care, love with courage,